Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Was Treated Like a Villain? Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Some people are always serious, while others occasionally wear a smile. Then there are those who seem to smile more often than not, yet still carry a serious demeanor. Among them is one person who always has a smile on their lips, making it hard to imagine them in a bad situation. This individual seems to radiate cheerfulness, as if it were their quirk, effortlessly making friends with nearly everyone at school. It felt like something out of an unrealistic movie, where a class forms a tight-knit team. However, I noticed that the usually cheerful boy had begun to isolate himself, retreating into his own thoughts instead of engaging with others. Instead of spreading joy, he buried himself in books, distancing himself from the world around him. During my substitute teaching hours, I could see that he seemed lost, his mind elsewhere. I understood his struggle, which is why I had also kept my distance. After the USJ incident, we all knew there was a traitor among us. Nizu had called a meeting to discuss suspicions surrounding Midoriya. It was a concern that weighed heavily on everyone. Nizu advised caution, instructing us to be careful about what we said or did around him, but not to reveal anything just yet. Initially, everyone kept their distance from Midoriya, who still tried to engage with his classmates, only to be met with insults. It was clear that they were aware of the suspicions surrounding him, yet he remained passive, accepting everything thrown his way as if it were normal. He showed no resistance when Nizu announced that he could no longer leave UA, nor when his dorm door was taken. I witnessed some students who refused to understand, believing they could physically intimidate someone who had not even been officially labeled a villain. I intervened, reminding them that we were in a hero school and that there was no justification for their actions. If they continued, I would report them to Principal Nizu myself. One student scoffed, suggesting that the villains were working together. I heard that and felt a surge of anger. As the students scattered, Midoriya rose from the floor, a smile on his face despite the blood from his nose. He thanked me, insisting that my intervention hadn't been necessary. I disagreed, expressing my confusion over why they treated him that way. We should check in with Recovery Girl, I suggested. Midoriya shook his head, revealing his awareness of the situation. He knew how others perceived him, how they suspected him of being a traitor simply because he was quirkless. He had felt the sting of their actions, losing everything he enjoyed and struggling to connect with others. He had to rely on his notebooks and pens, and now, that very reliance was being used against him. I tried to reassure him, insisting that people didn't take things from him without reason. But he saw through my words, stating that it hurt when I lied. He was aware of the signs, of how his friends had turned their backs on him. In friendship, there should be a balance of giving and taking, yet he felt as if he was the only one giving while everything he cherished was being taken away. No one trusted him anymore, as if he could turn into a villain at any moment. What was he to them? What was he to Midoriya? How could he be perceived this way, judged without a word spoken to him? He pondered if Midoriya was the villain. Before he could finish the thought, he realized how misguided it was. In his desperation, Midoriya projected his worries and fears onto him. He asked the one question that would hurt the most. Midoriya's sad eyes met his, but he remained silent, closing himself off completely. Midoriya decided it was best to leave. As Aoyama watched Midoriya walk past, he knew deep down that Midoriya wasn't the traitor. However, he had made a mistake in his work, and it had led to drastic consequences, drawing suspicion onto someone innocent. He needed to erase these mistakes before they were discovered. If the villains found out about his failure, it could end badly. He concocted a plan to shift the blame onto someone else. Aoyama had always felt a sense of disgust toward Midoriya. They were alike in some ways, yet so different. Midoriya was happy and carefree, embracing his quirkless state as if it were a gift rather than a curse. Aoyama felt the weight of his own struggles, unable to understand how Midoriya could smile without having faced the same pain. He had sacrificed so much to gain a quirk, believing it would lead to happiness. Seeing someone like Midoriya, who radiated joy without having to endure suffering, fueled his resentment. He approached Midoriya, feigning sympathy. He smiled as if trying to cheer him up, while secretly relishing in his misfortune. Midoriya, with a nosebleed, looked at him, perhaps realizing that happiness wasn't so easily attained. Aoyama thought that now Midoriya understood the pain he felt. He continued to mockingly express his thoughts, suggesting that everyone gets what they deserve. Midoriya greeted Aoyama, appreciating that someone wasn't ignoring or insulting him. He noted that some things never changed, and he was glad for it. Aoyama insisted he would never harm Midoriya, declaring him a friend. Yet, Midoriya seemed distant, lost in thought and skeptical of his words. He corrected Aoyama's French, pointing out the mistakes he had made. Aoyama felt a pang of embarrassment, realizing that Midoriya was more perceptive than he had anticipated. Midoriya advised him to be more careful, warning him not to attract suspicion. Aoyama felt a mix of frustration and fear. He knew he had to distance himself from Midoriya. One person knowing too much could jeopardize everything. Midoriya's bad reputation was his only shield. Midoriya cautioned him to put in more effort and not to speak ill of him. Aoyama, feeling defensive, retorted playfully, suggesting that Midoriya should avoid drawing attention to himself. Midoriya assured him that he operated in secrecy, reminding Aoyama that his smile didn't necessarily mean peace. During lunch break, Izuku found himself absorbed in a book, eating mechanically. He was so engrossed that he barely noticed anything around him. As he prepared to return to the rooftop for some quiet reading, he detected a metallic taste in his food. At first, it was subtle, but as he continued to eat, it became more pronounced. Confused, he wondered why his meal tasted so strange. He glanced around, noticing that no one else seemed to share his reaction. His food was different, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He looked over at the others, the metallic taste lingering in his mouth. None of them had sauce, yet he did. Lunch Rush hadn't given him any sauce, so it must have appeared on his plate unexpectedly. He examined the small bowl, inhaling its scent and tasting it. The metallic flavor confirmed his suspicions. What was this? Why was his food different? 1,000 questions raced through his mind. Was it a strange vegetable or fruit? And why didn't anyone else have the same experience? The metallic taste in his mouth intensified, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was no ordinary flavor. It felt deliberate, as if someone had planned this for him. Who would be foolish enough to try to poison him at UA? Every wall had cameras, and it could only be someone desperate. Those driven by fear or desperation could be more dangerous than the brave. Was this an attempt to remove him from the equation? He would rather leave anyway. He suspected it was Aoyama behind this. If it turned out he was wrong, then even better. He took the salt shaker and discreetly emptied it into his water glass under the table, aware that others were watching him. What did they think he would do? He was surrounded by children with powers in a school for future heroes, and he didn't even have a knife. Lunch Rush had only given him a plastic spoon, fragile like his mental state at that moment. He mixed the salt into the water and drank it all at once. Nausea hit him immediately. Slowly, he got up, packed his things, left his unfinished food on the table, and exited the room, feeling the silent stares follow him. Once he was out, he started running. Some students gave him strange looks, but he paid them no mind. He rushed to the bathroom, found an empty stall, and vomited, feeling as if he might never stop. Footsteps approached. Aizawa-sensei sighed and asked if he was okay. He thought to himself that he was perfectly fine, but instead he just nodded. He was already throwing up again. What did Aizawa expect him to say? Perhaps he wouldn't take him to Recovery Girl this time. Aizawa was probably just worried because it looked suspicious for him to be running around like this, especially after the chaos he had caused. He stood up, took a few steps from the toilet, and leaned against one of the sinks, breathing heavily. Tears filled his eyes as he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He looked terrible. His usually fluffy hair appeared dry, his face had bumps, his cheeks were flushed, and his eyes were swollen with dark circles beneath them. Then he noticed a white hair among the green-black strands that now resembled a dry bush. Aizawa-sensei sighed again and remarked that he looked bad. He replied with a sarcastic thank you. Aizawa suggested he should go to Recovery Girl. He insisted that fresh air was enough and that he could just go to the roof to avoid bothering anyone. Aizawa pointed out that he couldn't spend all his time on the roof. He countered that Aizawa shouldn't be in his sleeping bag either, as they both sought to avoid social interaction. He had no intention of throwing himself off the roof. He knew that because he had spent so much time with Shurikumo-sensei, the other students were especially wary of him, given his past friendship with a former villain. But he wouldn't let that stop him now. Aizawa followed him to the roof. He leaned against the fence, gazing down and taking a deep breath. Then he looked up at the sky, reaching out as if he wanted to touch the clouds. A small giggle escaped him, a carefree laugh reminiscent of happier times. He turned to Aizawa, looking him straight in the eyes. Midoriya asked why Aizawa was following him. Aizawa urged him to go to Recovery Girl. Midoriya insisted he was fine, claiming that the fresh air was enough and that he just needed a moment before returning. Aizawa sighed and asked what he planned to do after his break. Midoriya replied that he would wait on the roof until the break was over and then return to class with everyone else. There was a hint of sadness in his voice when he mentioned everyone else, as if he would have preferred to be alone. Aizawa insisted he would take him to Recovery Girl, even if he had to drag him. Midoriya protested, saying that if Aizawa dragged him around, it would only reinforce the idea that he was a villain. Aizawa sighed again, observing that Midoriya looked more dead than alive. At first, he had seemed younger than his age, but now he appeared older. He had started to get white hairs like an old man who had already lived through so much. Midoriya responded that perhaps Aizawa had dragged him into a life he was meant to leave behind. Life was a give and take, but he felt he was always giving and losing. He lamented that he had tried everything to be accepted, but it had led him nowhere. Aizawa asked if he felt regret. Midoriya's response was filled with emotion as he expressed his sorrow for living, for attending UA, and for believing he would ever be accepted. He felt he was constantly haunted by rumors, as if he might become a villain with a pen, like he was in a death note. Aizawa acknowledged that it was evident, noting that the other students were not being discreet. Midoriya remarked that they had built a wall to protect themselves, leaving him out while the true traitor was among them. Aizawa asked if he knew who the traitor was. Midoriya replied that they always wanted more, even his sanity. He laughed, but it was tinged with madness. He felt as if they had taken everything from him, and now he was just waiting for the truth to surface. Aizawa wondered what had led to this moment. Midoriya answered that the best questions often have no answers, not because they can't be found, but because they simply don't exist. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had just lived like a normal person when he shouldn't have been counted as one. What had happened to him? Midoriya concluded with a wish for Aizawa to be happy, even if it felt hollow. It is not the narrator who should feel guilty for being judged. The ones who should feel guilt are those who misjudge and make mistakes. Friends have been lost and regained, and despite the losses, there was always an understanding that there was no other choice. If the narrator had acted differently, those friends would have faced dire consequences. Yet, the narrator would leave with the intention of moving on, abandoned by many who had a choice. The narrator pondered what had just occurred. If Midoriya was innocent, everything could be resolved. If not, the situation was dire. Midoriya laughed, a sound filled with irony, suggesting that the arrangement was futile. The narrator reflected on the shame of what had happened, recalling that Midoriya was once a favorite student. Midoriya, however, felt broken and betrayed, indicating that nothing could be fixed anymore. The realization struck the narrator that they had misunderstood the situation. It was not about guilt but rather the pain of betrayal that had altered Midoriya's demeanor. The pain in Midoriya's eyes was evident, and the narrator felt the weight of their own betrayal. Nizu observed the unfolding events with concern. Aizawa had informed him that Midoriya was aware of the suspicions surrounding him. It was a mistake to alert the other students, as rumors had spread like wildfire. Initially, it was merely a suspicion of treachery, but soon it escalated to claims of Midoriya being a villain. The distinction between a traitor and a villain was crucial, yet the chaos had already begun, leading to physical confrontations. Midoriya endured the attacks without complaint, brushing himself off and returning to his reading, seemingly unfazed. Nizu found himself conflicted. Midoriya's calmness could indicate guilt, but it could also be a reflection of his true character. Despite the accusations, Midoriya remained friendly, apologizing even when insulted. Nizu had intended to observe him further, but the situation had spiraled out of control. Midoriya had been taken to a room and restrained to a table without resistance. Nizu watched through the camera as Aizawa began questioning him, framing the inquiries as if Midoriya were already guilty. Midoriya's response was unexpected. He remained composed, smiling gently, and did not exhibit fear or anger. His demeanor was perplexing. A guilty person would likely show fear, while an innocent one might express outrage. Yet, Midoriya's calmness only deepened the mystery. After a time, Lunch Rush brought food and released Midoriya's restraints. Midoriya expressed gratitude but then pushed the food away, resting his head on the table. Was this an act of defiance or simply a sign of discomfort? Aizawa had mentioned that Midoriya had been unwell, which could explain his lack of appetite. Lunch Rush inquired about Midoriya's refusal to eat. Midoriya offered a sweet smile in response, but Nizu remained vigilant, observing every movement. Tsukachi arrived, ready to investigate further. Nizu pointed out Midoriya as the suspect, though he admitted uncertainty about the situation. Nizu noticed Shurikumo attempting to coax Midoriya into eating, but Midoriya resisted, leaning away from the offered spoon. In a moment of chaos, he fell backward, pulling the table down with him, resulting in a mess of soup and debris. Tsukachi's skepticism grew as he witnessed Midoriya's refusal of help, struggling to regain his footing while still restrained. Nizu explained to Tsukachi that the information in Midoriya's notebooks was coded and took time to decipher. The details were unsettling, including sketches of human and dog skeletons, with notes on the genetic mutations between them. Tsukachi found the findings eerie, while Nizu noted that Midoriya had indeed uncovered significant insights. Tsukachi sat before Midoriya, who greeted him with a smile that lacked warmth. Tsukachi prepared to ask questions, reminding Midoriya that everything was being recorded. Midoriya acknowledged this, confident in his honesty. Tsukachi pressed on, asking about Midoriya's knowledge of his quirk, to which Midoriya replied that he had read about it in various newspapers. The question of how one can participate in so many cases often arises. The answer is straightforward. The ability to perceive lies allows for involvement in numerous cases, whether through direct interrogation or by reviewing recordings later. Often, one may find themselves inactive in a case. Collaborating with many heroes, such as Eraserhead and All Might, is also common. While Eraserhead's activities rarely make headlines, All Might's victories against villains often receive minimal coverage, with mentions of the interrogation being overshadowed. The child, Izuku Midoriya, was 15 years old and had a keen eye for detail. He lived with his mother, who possessed a weak telekinesis quirk, while his father, who had the ability to breathe fire, was absent, working overseas. Midoriya spoke of his father's absence as if it were a normal topic, revealing that his parents were still married despite both wanting a divorce, as his mother lacked the funds for legal action and his father was often intoxicated. Midoriya had no siblings and was uncertain about his father's life abroad, speculating about the possibility of half-siblings. He had been aware of rumors regarding his supposed betrayal and had noticed the change in expressions around him from the very first day. It was evident when someone mumbled and was then confronted aggressively. When asked about the USJ, Midoriya expressed familiarity with many of the villains. His passion for researching quirks and heroes extended to his classmates, as he believed understanding one's abilities and weaknesses was crucial for growth. He meticulously collected information, ensuring it was coded to prevent misuse, as he feared that knowledge could be weaponized against others. Despite his analytical skills, Midoriya viewed his research as a harmless hobby. He had discovered vulnerabilities in heroes, such as Hound Dog's difficulty in lateral movement due to his unique anatomy. This precise analysis was merely a pastime for him. From Tsukachi's perspective, it was clear that Midoriya could never be a traitor. When asked about betraying classmates or teachers, he recalled tutoring Kaminari after Bakugo had insulted him, helping him achieve a good grade while taking no credit for himself. This behavior seemed incompatible with the notion of villainy. Midoriya's alibi was strong. His mother was aware of his notebooks, which he had kept since childhood. His classmate, Katsuki Bakugo, had known him for years and could attest to his consistent writing habits. However, their relationship had soured, leading Midoriya to believe they were never truly friends. When questioned about contact with villains, Midoriya mentioned the attack at the USJ, but this was a lie. He had encountered a villain before, during the incident with the sludge villain. Despite the evidence of his innocence, doubts lingered about his true nature, especially when he insisted that the sludge villain was his only encounter. The investigation continued, with the truth remaining elusive. The villain was from the League of Villains. Midoriya wasn't sure if he officially belonged to them, but it seemed likely. Curiosity struck, and Midoriya revealed that the villain had accused him of being a traitor, claiming everything was his fault and that he didn't deserve happiness. The realization hit Midoriya hard. He was the real traitor. The villain had spoken in a different language, and Midoriya had discovered that he wasn't from the country he claimed to be from. When asked for the villain's name, Midoriya hesitated. He didn't want anyone else to suffer the same fate. He believed there were good aspects to the villain that had been overshadowed by discrimination. The attempt to poison him was likely an act of desperation. Concerned, Midoriya's companion insisted they couldn't let the villain roam free. Midoriya suggested that it might be better to confront the villain rather than harm an innocent person. Midoriya then explained that he had no need for help or a key to recovery, tearing through his restraints with surprising ease. He pointed out that the quirk suppression cuffs were poorly made, designed only to stop quirks but not strong enough to hold him. Nizu entered the room, acknowledging that Midoriya had all his rights back and apologizing for the situation. Midoriya was determined to leave, stating that he had already prepared the necessary paperwork, which had been signed long ago by his mother. Aizawa questioned how this was possible since Midoriya hadn't officially left UA. Midoriya explained that he had been forced to use a pigeon to communicate with his mother, sending the documents back and forth. Midnight warned Nizu against letting Midoriya go, suggesting that his future would be bleak if he did. Nizu, however, wanted to ensure everything was in order, needing signatures from both Midoriya and his mother. Midoriya insisted he had completed all the required protocols and had been preparing for this moment for a long time. He expressed his frustration about the difficulties he faced and the damage to his reputation. Shurikumo, another character, urged Midoriya not to make this decision, expressing remorse for past mistakes. Midoriya's response was filled with bitterness, reflecting on his struggles and the friendships he had sought but never found. He felt regret for his past aspirations of becoming a hero and lamented the years spent chasing after something unattainable. His voice had changed from gentle to weary, revealing the pain he had endured. Shurikumo pleaded for another chance, reminding Midoriya that he had seen him as a person rather than just a student. Midoriya shared his past experiences of being bullied and how he had hoped for understanding. Despite Shurikumo's insistence that they could fix things, Midoriya felt abandoned during his hardest times. His laughter, tinged with pain and anger, echoed in the room. Nizu sighed and agreed to sign the papers, asking if Midoriya wanted to sell his uniform back to the school. Midoriya had no intention of selling the uniform, despite Nizu's suggestion that someone in need of money could buy it cheaper. He had other plans for it. When Nizu inquired about those plans, Midoriya expressed a desire to see how it burned, his voice taking on a manic edge that suggested a loss of sanity. Nizu sifted through some papers, his attention caught by a recent case involving a tragic incident. The individual had attempted to end their life in 10 different ways simultaneously, likely seeking to make a mark on history. Since Midoriya's departure and Aoyama's arrest, UA had fallen into an unsettling silence. Many students were lost in their thoughts, missing Midoriya's laughter and murmurs that once filled the halls. Nizu had begun researching various cases to distract himself, focusing only on those that piqued his interest. The human mind was capable of extraordinary things, and the complexity of the recent case was both fascinating and tragic. The body had been nearly unrecognizable, but the autopsy revealed the sequence of events. The individual had started on a 2-level bridge, tying a rope to the fence and around their neck. They had doused themselves in gasoline, ingested poison, taken a large dose of medication, and consumed spider lilies. After cutting their wrist, they had jumped in front of an oncoming car, setting themselves on fire and ultimately shooting themselves. The sequence of attempts was harrowing, culminating in a final plunge into the water below. The victim had been identified as a young boy, quirkless, who might have chosen a quicker, less painful method had he simply wanted to end his life. Instead, it seemed he had aimed to make a statement, perhaps seeking revenge on those who had pushed him to such despair. His actions spoke volumes, a message delivered through tragic means rather than words. Nizu pondered the boy's motives, wondering about Himation Yuki, the name that had finally surfaced after much investigation. It had taken time to uncover his identity, and Nizu speculated whether the boy sought revenge against his bullies. If he had merely intended to end his life quietly, few would have noticed, but this was different. The implications of his actions would reverberate through the lives of those involved. Suddenly, Nizu's phone rang, and it was Tsukachi. Nizu was surprised, as Tsukachi rarely called him without reason. The conversation quickly turned serious as Tsukachi revealed new information about the suicide case. The body had been misidentified. The quirkless boy they had thought was Himation Yuki had actually been found dead in an alley. Tsukachi explained that the true identity of the deceased had been uncovered due to the discovery of clothing belonging to a UA student. Nizu's heart sank as he realized the implications. There had only been one quirkless student at UA, and he had made a chilling remark about wanting to see the UA uniform burn. The pieces fell into place, and Nizu felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He knew he had to remain composed and think carefully about the next steps to take. Meanwhile, Toga felt the absence of Kurogiri deeply. He had been the one to support Shigi's plans, to help with injuries, and to ensure that their schemes were foolproof. Without him, chaos reigned. Toga found herself growing restless, her desire for mischief bubbling to the surface. She playfully announced her intentions to stab someone, but the others were indifferent. Dabi, lost in his own world of blue flames, barely acknowledged her, while the doc dragged a large piece of coal into the room, prompting her curiosity. "Why are you dragging that coal with you?" Shigi wondered, noticing the object in Doc's hands. He wanted to touch it, but Doc quickly pulled his hand away, cautioning him not to. Doc gently stroked the piece of coal, treating it as if it were a precious treasure, despite its appearance as a mere burnt fragment. Shigi expressed his frustration, insisting that it would only make everything dirty. He lamented the lack of cleanliness around them. Doc, indignant, questioned Shigi's understanding of what he held. Dabi chimed in, suggesting that if coal was needed, he could assist. Doc was upset that after all the effort he had put into acquiring this item, it was being dismissed as mere dirt or coal. Twice, in a playful tone, declared that he knew what it was. Doc revealed that it was the key to their success, while Twice humorously referred to it as wonderful. Doc then revealed the shocking truth. It was a corpse, intended for a new Nomu. Shigi, unimpressed, remarked on the corpse's fragile state, comparing it to cookies. Doc insisted that this body held special significance, as the individual had made history through their tragic death. He recounted the story of a person named Himation Yuki, who had attempted to take his own life using 10 different methods. As Doc spoke, the body became clearer to Shigi, who noticed its form. He mused that it would have been better if the person had simply ended it quickly. Doc clarified that the body had been misidentified, revealing that the actual deceased was a former UA student who had recently left the school. All eyes turned to Doc as he explained that this student had been accused of being a traitor but had proven his innocence before leaving. Shigi scoffed at the idea of a UA student, suggesting they lived pampered lives. Doc pointed out that the student had been quirkless and had suffered greatly due to the accusations against him. The thought of this student becoming a Nomu would surely hurt many teachers, especially since he had died because of their claims. Doc added that this new Nomu could provide some therapy for the group, who had been feeling down since Kurogiri's departure. Dabi, irritated, warned Doc to be careful with his words. Twice joked that the sunshine had burned out, while Doc revealed the identity of the corpse, Izuku Midoriya. The revelation shocked everyone. Doc explained that Midoriya had always tried to protect others, possessing extensive knowledge about quirks and often risking his life to be a hero. Shiggy laughed, questioning whether Midoriya would truly become a villain. Doc confirmed that Kurogiri had been a hero in training before his death, while Midoriya had succumbed to resentment against heroes due to their treatment of him. Mr. Compress noted how the tables had turned, while Doc emphasized Midoriya's potential as a tactician, given his knowledge of heroes and quirks. In a different scene, Oboro found himself in a gathering called by Nizu, who stood on a podium with a table adorned with white flowers and a UA uniform. As chaos erupted among the students searching for their seats, Oboro wondered about the purpose of the flowers. Nizu began his speech, thanking everyone for attending on such short notice. He aimed to clarify the misunderstandings surrounding a former student who had been wrongfully suspected of villainy. He revealed that video evidence would be used to address the students who had mistreated this innocent individual. Nizu expressed disappointment in their behavior, reminding them that caution should not equate to treating someone like garbage. As Oboro listened, he bit his lip, feeling the weight of the topic. Nizu continued, challenging the students on whether they would have treated an innocent person poorly while the real traitor was among them. He stressed that they were students, not heroes, and that their actions could lead to the creation of villains. Ida raised his hand, acknowledging Nizu's point but reminding him that they were training to combat villains. Nizu countered that heroes should protect and support people, not cause collateral damage in their fights. He lamented that the focus had shifted from protecting civilians to merely seeking out battles. Nizu then addressed the reason for his speech and the presence of the flowers. He revealed that Midoriya had left, and his last wish was for his UA uniform to be burned. The revelation sent shockwaves through the students, igniting chaos once more. No one would have expected Midoriya to say something like that. Nizu acknowledged the unexpected nature of the situation, explaining that they had truly pushed him to his limits, even if it seemed he had none. He had kept his promise and set the uniform on fire, but tragically he had also harmed himself in the process. This revelation left everyone in shock, their eyes wide as they processed the implications of his words. What did he mean? Did he really mean that he was gone? Was that why the white flowers adorned the table? Nizu continued, sharing a grim story about a suicide case where the victim's identity had been misidentified due to the state of the body. The truth was that the actual person was Izuku Midoriya. The room fell into chaos at this revelation. Had they truly let things escalate this far? One person felt a heavy weight of guilt, believing they should have been there for him, offering a shoulder to cry on. They had wanted to change their life for the better, yet felt they had failed in the most significant way. Everyone was frozen, displaying a range of emotions. Some were filled with sadness, others with anger, while some struggled to accept the reality that the once joyful boy was now gone, just like that. The pain of his absence was already profound, and now it felt unbearable. Nizu began distributing letters to some individuals. Shortly after learning of Midoriya's death, a pigeon had arrived carrying several notes. These were not traditional letters but rather small pieces of paper containing thoughts and questions from Midoriya. Nizu unfolded one of the elegantly crafted notes, a paper swan that symbolized grace and beauty. It felt strange that such a delicate creature would carry such a heavy message. The note contained a single, haunting sentence: "I didn't die, I was already dead before I killed myself. Every day, I withered before your eyes like a flower while you all had the water I needed." Nizu clenched his fist around the fragile paper, feeling the weight of those painful words. Though he had never directly blamed anyone for Midoriya's death, the message still stung deeply. Aizawa opened his crumpled note, which was heavy with a stone wrapped inside. It contained a personal message that reminded him of a moment when he had told Midoriya he was his favorite teacher. Had Midoriya felt the weight of those words? Bakugo examined his note, which was slightly burned, with a dry spider lily attached. It read, "Are you proud of me? I did what you wanted, and I even did it better than you asked." He wondered if he could have done something to prevent Midoriya's tragic choice. If he had spoken up against the rumors, perhaps things would have been different. The thought that his silence might have contributed to Midoriya's despair weighed heavily on him. Shurikumo found his note tangled in a piece of dirty wool. After searching, he finally discovered the note that had fallen to the ground. It simply asked, "Are you the villain?" For simple words that carried immense meaning. To anyone else, they might seem insignificant, but for him, they were a painful reminder of his past actions. He trembled, realizing how much he had hurt Midoriya, who had seen him as a friend despite their differences. The memories of their time together felt bittersweet, and he struggled with the realization that he had let Midoriya down when he needed support the most. Oboro felt overwhelmed by emotions, knowing that fighting against them would only prolong his suffering. His vision blurred as he struggled to breathe, feeling as if his heart might stop at any moment. The faces around him became unfamiliar, and before he could react, he felt a sharp pain in his neck before everything faded to black. Izuku tried to hide behind the doctor, feeling overwhelmed by the new faces surrounding him. The doctor, though small, was his only source of comfort in this awkward situation. A blonde girl remarked on how much cuter he looked, while a man with blue hair, resembling a fairy, questioned why Izuku had to look so similar to Kurogiri. The doctor sighed, explaining that Izuku was simply shy, a stark contrast to the confident boy he once was. "Are you sure you caught the right one?" What he did at the USJ and during the sports festival was anything but shy. The doctor urged Izuku to greet the others, but he remained silent, trying to hide. The name felt foreign, yet oddly familiar, as if he had known someone by that name very well. The doctor pressed again, asking if he could say hello. Izuku managed a quiet greeting, and one of the masked figures commented on how adorable he was. A blonde girl chimed in, expressing her admiration for his small stature and the red shoes he wore to you. Izuku thanked her, unsure how to respond. The girl then made a startling remark, hinting at a desire to stab him, which left him speechless. Another masked man intervened, reminding everyone that their behavior would only frighten him further, as he was still very much a child. Izuku looked around, feeling terrified. A man with blue hair, resembling a fairy, asked about his quirk. Confused, Izuku wondered what a quirk was, even though he knew everyone had one. He recalled various quirks he had heard of, a lie detector, one that enhanced intelligence, and another that controlled fire and ice. The thought of an explosive quirk made him uneasy, as if he had a bad connection to it. The blue-haired man insisted that Izuku must have a quirk, prompting him to question why everyone spoke as if he had been someone else before. He felt lost, asking who they were and what they wanted. The blue-haired man, named Shigaraki, remarked that Izuku was always the emotional one. Izuku protested, feeling overwhelmed. The masked man introduced himself as Compress, and the girl as Toga, while the man who looked like a burned chicken nugget was called Dabi. Izuku found Dabi's name peculiar and questioned its origin. Shigaraki laughed, agreeing that the name was silly and joking about Dabi's taste. Dabi retorted, defending Toga's name, which Izuku found amusing. Curious about Toga's quirk, Izuku asked if it was blood-related. Toga seemed slightly offended but engaged with his questions. Izuku speculated about the nature of her quirk, pondering whether it required drinking blood and if it came with any drawbacks. He expressed fascination with her abilities, which seemed to impress her. Before he could ask more, Toga hugged him, and he felt a sense of safety in her embrace, though it soon became uncomfortable. Dabi noted that it was the first time she hadn't tried to stab anyone during a hug. Later, Izuku sat at a table, jotting down his thoughts in a small notebook. He had 2 notebooks, one for coordinates and the other for analyses. He had begun a careful examination of his quirk, which he deemed weak. However, he understood that with good control, even a weak quirk could make him an unpredictable opponent. For now, he felt more like emotional support for the villains than a true member. He could create small portals, which had grown from just wide enough for a finger to a radius of 5 centimeters. While not practical for transportation, he was still working on mastering it. Dabi asked if he had done anything besides analyze his quirk over the past week. Izuku joked about not having a moment's sleep, to which Dabi advised him to rest. Izuku dismissed the suggestion, feeling too restless. Shigaraki called him an NPC, and Izuku reflected on the information he had gathered from old reports and police documents. He had pieced together that he might be a Nomu, created from a deceased individual, as the doctor had never acted like a typical physician but more like a mad scientist. He felt no multifaceted identity, only vague memories of a single life, leading him to wonder about the nature of his existence. As Izuku pondered whether he was one or several, or if he might recover fragments of his past, he was suddenly embraced from behind. Toga expressed her desire to go out with him, leaving Izuku momentarily confused. Compress, surprised, questioned whether they were dating, while Twice reacted dramatically, feeling betrayed by Toga's sudden interest. Toga's excitement turned dark as she mentioned wanting to go on a killing spree, prompting Dabi to sigh in exasperation. Shigaraki interjected, stating that Izuku was not yet prepared for such matters, as he could hardly control his quirk. Izuku protested, asserting that he could control it, though it wasn't very powerful. He suggested that they could always run if things went awry. Shigaraki challenged him to demonstrate his abilities, and Izuku conjured his largest portal, which was about 12 centimeters in diameter. Shigaraki laughed, mocking the idea that Toga could escape through such a small portal. Despite the teasing, Izuku had a plan. He wanted to go out, yearning to witness something that might jog his memory of the past, even as he feared that his past might be something dreadful. He took a glass bottle of wine and pushed it through his portal. Shigaraki dismissed the act, claiming that transporting wine bottles wouldn't help him. As Izuku closed the portal, the glass bottle remained, perfectly cut in two, with wine cascading down the remaining piece. Dabi found it impressive, while Shigaraki inquired if he could replicate the feat with other objects, even people. Izuku confirmed he could. Toga eagerly insisted that he must come along, and Shigaraki reluctantly agreed, warning that it would be Izuku's responsibility if he lost his way. He advised that Izuku would need a false identity to avoid trouble with heroes. Compress suggested a name related to Mask, given Izuku's ability to conceal his identity. Dabi teased him about the suggestion, while Twice offered a series of ridiculous names. Toga thought it should sound villainous, and Izuku proposed Dark Aizu, which was met with skepticism. He then suggested Ambervert, feeling an inexplicable connection to the French language, though it carried a sense of foreboding. The moment Izuku's name was chosen, Toga pulled him along, and they dashed through the streets. Izuku urged her to slow down, expressing his reluctance to be the early worm that gets eaten. Toga insisted they needed to hurry, revealing that her blood supplies had run out because Dabi and Shigaraki didn't think it safe for her to go on a spree without Kurogiri's teleportation. Izuku offered to give her blood, which surprised Toga, who noted she would remember his offer for future reference. As they ran hand in hand through an abandoned park, Izuku questioned the need to be in such a desolate place. Toga explained they were heading to less abandoned areas and might break into somewhere if needed. Izuku hesitated, noting that breaking the law wasn't ideal. Toga reminded him that they were in an underground bar filled with people who had issues and villainous quirks, implying that legality was not a concern. They found themselves in a less abandoned area, where Toga whispered that the point of leaving the bar was to find someone, not to hide. Peering out, they spotted a man in black with a white scarf, accompanied by another man sitting on a cloud. Izuku felt a sense of familiarity with them. Toga identified them as Eraserhead and Loud Cloud, two heroes. Izuku recognized them vaguely, like seeing an apple and knowing it was an apple without understanding its significance. Toga's offer of blood still stood, and she took one of her knives to make a small cut on his arm. Surprisingly, it didn't hurt as much as he expected, perhaps due to his high pain tolerance. Blood dripped onto Toga's hand, and she licked her lips, then leaped from the alley, leaving Izuku momentarily stunned. He wanted to pull her back but couldn't reach her, wondering if she was being reckless. Toga greeted the two, her cheerful demeanor contrasting with Loud Cloud's tired expression and Eraserhead's irritation. His hair flared in the air, a red glow emanating from behind his goggles. Toga appeared offended, as if her plan to transform into someone else had faltered. Thoughts raced through Loud Cloud's mind. He recognized these two individuals from somewhere and remembered that Eraserhead could temporarily erase people's quirks. He picked up some pebbles from the ground and created a small portal leading to Eraserhead, throwing the handful of stones through it, though he missed with half. Nonetheless, some stones made it through. As the stones struck Eraserhead, he stopped using his quirk and looked away, giving Toga the opportunity to lick the blood from her hand. In an instant, she transformed into a boy with striking green hair and freckles, looking remarkably young. Was that him? Oboro was in shock as he witnessed Toga take on Midoriya's form. He felt his control slipping away. This was supposed to be a calm patrol to clear his mind after everything that had happened. That was the only reason he had agreed to it. Sho urged him to leave, insisting he could handle the situation alone. Oboro felt overwhelmed, unable to fight a villain while grappling with a panic attack. He took to the skies on his clouds, feeling the weight of sadness. Nothing had changed, Midoriya was still gone. Memories flooded back, and he reminded himself that Toga had merely obtained his blood, nothing more. Midoriya was likely buried deep underground. The last words he heard were from Toga, or rather Midoriya, telling someone to follow him. Uncertainty lingered in his mind. Suddenly, a familiar portal appeared before him as he rode on his cloud. A hand reached out, and he narrowly dodged it. He jumped off his cloud and looked around, anxious about what had stopped him. He wondered who was there. A voice emerged from the shadows, revealing a Nomu. The voice was surprisingly emotional, unlike the cold demeanor he had expected. This Nomu seemed to possess a deeper humanity. Oboro questioned the Nomu's intentions, sensing that it didn't want to harm him. The Nomu admitted it didn't take pleasure in killing and had never done so before. A shadowy figure approached, slightly greenish and small, holding a notebook. Oboro focused intently on the conversation, momentarily forgetting his panic and guilt over someone else taking his role. The Nomu sought information, but Oboro refused to share any secrets about heroes. The Nomu clarified that it wasn't interested in hero secrets but wanted to know how Oboro discovered his past, considering he had been a Nomu without access to such information. Oboro reflected on the Nomu's words, realizing it was aware of its identity. He had never questioned his own existence, having been brainwashed to protect Tamura. The Nomu seemed free, prompting Oboro to inquire how it had learned about being a Nomu. The Nomu explained its research through newspaper articles and police reports, piecing together its identity and expressing gratitude for Oboro's past. Curiosity piqued, Oboro asked the Nomu's age, but it was still trying to figure that out. The Nomu then inquired about the green-haired boy Toga had transformed into, revealing its knowledge of Midoriya. Oboro shared that Midoriya had been a student who had tragically died. The Nomu expressed sympathy, sensing the weight of Oboro's emotions. As Oboro struggled to contain his feelings, the Nomu reassured him that Midoriya was already gone and that he shouldn't feel guilty for distancing himself from those who had caused him pain. The Nomu placed a comforting hand on Oboro's shoulder, affirming that the danger of him reverting to a Nomu had passed. As Oboro tried to catch his breath, the Nomu departed. Izuku felt a mix of emotions as he processed the Nomu's sadness over Midoriya's death. He sensed a connection, as if he knew the man somehow, and suspected betrayal had led to his demise. Now, he grappled with the question of whether he truly wanted to regain his memories and uncover the truth of what had happened to him. If my past life was so painful that I wanted it to end, why should I want to remember? As I walked through the streets, no one recognized me. I hadn't done anything wrong to be hunted. The streets grew more crowded, illuminated by numerous streetlights. I scanned the area until I spotted a figure standing alone, obscured by a black hoodie. A portal appeared behind the person, and I struck their pressure point, causing them to collapse. I hurried to the alley where they fell and quickly took their phone, aware that I needed to keep it active, as I didn't know the password. I pulled the oversized hoodie over myself, which concealed my hands and helped me blend in. I wanted to avoid any heroes who might connect me to Kurogiri. Leaving the man in the alley, I focused on the phone, searching for Midoriya. Despite my dark past, I needed to uncover the truth. Living with "what if" was no longer an option. Questions flooded my mind. Midoriya had participated in the sports festival, which meant I had been a student at UA. The pictures on the phone displayed a smiling face, freckled with green hair and big cheeks. Yet, no memories surfaced. I couldn't recall ever being that happy. Suddenly, a newspaper article caught my attention. The title was unsettling, "Most Suicides at Once." It had to be connected to me, otherwise, it wouldn't have appeared. But why did it feel so dark compared to the cheerful photos? I opened the article and was met with a trigger warning, followed by the revelation that I was quirkless. The lengthy article detailed how I was the first quirkless student to attend UA and make it into the hero course. It also mentioned an incident known as the USJ attack, where I was accused of being a traitor working for the villains. How could they accuse someone with such a beautiful smile? If someone had claimed that the boy in the photos, my former self, was a villain and would take his own life, I would have thought they were insane. The article continued, stating that Midoria, me, left UA after the accusations were proven false. My eyes widened as I read on. I had told the principal that I wanted to see the uniform burn and had set myself on fire shortly afterward. I had jumped off a bridge. I had endured several traumatic events, including a car running over me while I hung from a rope, and finally, I had flown off a bridge and landed in the water. I stared at the phone in shock. I had been accused of villainy. My life as a quirkless person had been anything but easy, filled with betrayal. But if I had the courage to survive until I was 15 in old age for someone without a quirk, why had I given up? I must have faced immense betrayal. Why hadn't it affected me as deeply this time? I hacked a bit more until I discovered my address. I didn't want to confront the person I grew up with, but I was certain I had kept a diary. My obsession with writing down quirks and heroes meant I must have done so in my past life as well. I needed to see my room. I definitely did. Aizawa stormed into Nizu's office, urgency and anxiety coursing through him. He hadn't discussed their meeting point with Oboro, and since Oboro had a dorm there, he assumed he might be inside. However, he was nowhere to be found. Aizawa even checked with Hound Dog, waking half the staff in the process, which only added to his frustration. He dashed around the office, searching every corner, but Nizu was absent. Typical. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed a drawer slowly opening. Was Nizu really sleeping in a drawer? Aizawa pushed that thought aside, focusing on the more pressing issue. Nizu appeared, inquiring about the problem. Aizawa explained that Oboro was missing. They had gone out together for fresh air after everything that had happened, but they had encountered Toga. Aizawa had managed to neutralize her quirk quickly, but then something had been thrown at him from the side. Toga had transformed into Midoria. Nizu's expression shifted to one of concern. Aizawa continued, explaining that he had told Oboro to run, fearing he might lose control after confronting Toga. And Oboro had vanished. Aizawa had searched everywhere for him. His fight with Toga had taken time, and if Oboro had used his cloud, he would have reached the dorm by now. Aizawa had retraced their entire patrol route after dealing with Toga. Nizu listened intently, asking about the blood Toga had used to transform. Aizawa admitted he didn't know how she had obtained it, but it must have been before the tragic incident involving Midoriya, as he had been completely burned. Before Nizu could respond, the door burst open, and Oboro rushed in, urgency evident in his demeanor. He was panting heavily and apologized for the delay, explaining that he hadn't trusted his quirk and didn't want to accidentally open a portal instead of his cloud. He had seen something. Nizu focused on Oboro, who interrupted, stating that it wasn't about Midoriya. Confusion spread among them. Since Midoriya's death, Oboro had seemed like a different person, haunted by his past. What could be more important now? Oboro revealed that the villains had created another Nomu. Nizu's brow furrowed further as he asked if it was similar to the one that had attacked during the USJ incident. Oboro shook his head vigorously, clarifying that this one was different. It was like him. Exactly like me, but green and black. Nizu expressed his skepticism, questioning whether the being Oboro encountered might simply be a villain. Oboro insisted that the figure sounded young and displayed more human-like behavior, indicating a lack of knowledge about his past. He even mentioned that the being had asked him how he managed to remember his own history. It was clear that this individual knew he was a Nomu, just as Oboro was. In response to Nizu's inquiry about the emotional state of the Nomu, Oboro explained that the being shared his quirk but seemed to struggle with controlling it. He speculated that advancements had been made since Kurogiri's creation, suggesting that the villains had likely improved their methods. Nizu sought confirmation, and Oboro affirmed that he was indeed confident it was a Nomu. The being had expressed a desire to understand his identity, having researched his existence through police reports, which also led him to learn about Oboro. Nizu considered the possibility that the Nomu might have been intentionally given a will or that there had been a mistake in its creation. He suggested that the Nomu might have harbored resentment towards heroes even in its past life, which could explain the decision to grant it a will. Oboro noted the youthfulness of the Nomu, pointing out the innocence in its speech. The Nomu had even claimed to dislike killing and stated that he had never done so. The concern grew that the villains might attempt to manipulate the Nomu into believing he was a villain over time, especially since he likely awoke without any memories of his past. Nizu, sensing the urgency of the situation, proposed that they act quickly before things escalated. If the Nomu was aware of his identity, they needed to seize the opportunity to assess whether he posed a threat or if he could be rehabilitated. Oboro and I exchanged worried glances, fully aware of the seriousness of the situation. Time was of the essence, and we had to act before the villains could exploit the potential of this new Nomu. Izuku arrived at the front door and quickly created a portal to look around inside the house. He soon spotted the keys hanging on the wall, reached through the portal to grab them, and opened the door. He felt indifferent about who might be inside. He slowly walked through the familiar house, already knowing what lay behind each door. As he examined the walls, he hoped to find pictures, but they were bare. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching, recognizing them as belonging to a woman. A memory surfaced, reminding him that he should have only lived there with his mother. The woman confronted him, demanding to know what he was doing there and threatening to call the police. Izuku dismissed her threats, confident that she would likely call regardless of his actions. Just as he turned around, a vase flew toward him. He swiftly dodged and created a portal that redirected the vase, causing it to knock the woman out. He caught her before she fell, not wanting the vase to break, as it was quite nice. Observing the woman on the ground, he realized her quirk allowed her to move objects, and if she utilized poison needles, she would be a formidable opponent. It was intriguing how he instinctively understood this about her. Stepping over her, he continued toward his room, but was taken aback when he opened the door. The room looked entirely different from what he had envisioned. It was filled with boxes, as if someone was moving in or out. He rummaged through the boxes, recognizing the contents: merchandise, books, and clothes, all familiar to him. He felt a mix of anger and understanding. The woman had recently lost her child, yet he wouldn't have discovered this place if she hadn't packed everything up. He had found the address because she listed it for sale, but it was unexpected to see his belongings. Searching for a notebook, he found none, despite being certain he had one in his previous life. As he continued to look around, he closed his eyes tightly and focused on the room again. In a flashback, he saw not just the boxes but the furniture in its original place. A boy sat at the desk, and Izuku wondered if that was him. The boy spoke rapidly, sharing thoughts that felt familiar, as if they were his own. The green-haired child discussed the possibility of MT Lady's blood cells growing without multiplying, theorizing about her quirk and its drawbacks. He scribbled notes quickly yet neatly, clearly a younger version of Izuku. The woman called out to him, demanding he wash the dishes, but the boy insisted he was on the verge of a breakthrough. She insisted he come down, mentioning a boyfriend visiting that evening and wanting the house tidy. The boy promised he would stay out of sight, even joking about hiding under his bed. As the boy stood up and moved his chair, he began to tinker with the fan, revealing a hidden space. He placed the notebook inside and secured the fan cover back on. The green-haired boy hoped his mother wouldn't call someone to fix the fan. He didn't want to find a new hiding place. Those notebooks were all he had left from that life. Returning to the present, he stood in a room filled with boxes. Slowly, he pushed a box to the center of the room where the fan was located. He could have easily used a portal, but there was something comforting about reaching for the fan with his own hands, as if he had done it countless times before. He wanted to savor this feeling of home. Unscrewing the loose screws, he carefully took the fan down and noticed a hole. Without hesitation, he let the fan fall to the ground and quickly reached into the hole. His fingers brushed against something, and as soon as he grasped it, he pulled it out. To his horror, it was a dead rat. He tossed the rat aside and created a portal, feeling disgusted. Taking a step back, he stumbled and fell backward from the box, kicking the rat away as it flew through the portal. He realized he had just thrown a dead rat into another dimension and heard panicked screams from the other side. He felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him, knowing he shouldn't have done that. Climbing back onto the box, he searched the hole again and felt something that resembled notebooks and pens. Pulling them out, he climbed down and discovered a treasure trove of analyses: 14 hero analyses, 17 villain analyses, and a few on his classmates' quirks. Each series was labeled with numbers, but he had only counted 4 analyses of his classmates. He wondered if there was anything else hidden away. Climbing back onto the box, he spotted another book. The title page read "Diary" in beautiful handwriting, but it was crossed out, replaced with the words "Deku's Shitty Life" scrawled in messy letters. The book was burned, worse than the others he had seen. Holding it close, he gently ran his hand over the title, whispering that it was safe. He knew he would probably dislike the contents, reflecting on his life, but ever since he stepped into this house, he felt compelled to uncover his past. Meanwhile, Nizu had gathered everyone together for an important meeting. It was late, but they needed to stay alert. The Nomu might be in greater trouble than they realized. They discussed the possibility of the League of Villains accidentally giving it consciousness and what they would do if that happened. As they sat around the table, some in pajamas and others dressed in dark clothing, a portal suddenly opened, and a dead rat flew through, hitting Yamada in the face. Chaos erupted as staff members ducked under the table or covered their ears. Nizu, trying to maintain order, asked if anyone had a protocol for flying rodents. In the midst of the chaos, Izuku found himself stuck in his portal, half in his old room and half in a bar. He kicked his legs frantically, knowing that stopping his quirk would be disastrous. Dabi laughed, while Shigi and Toga questioned his delay. In a moment of desperation, he called for help, fearing he might accidentally cut himself in half. As his friends pulled him free, Spinner expressed his concern about the portal's potential danger. Izuku admitted he wasn't sure if his own portal could harm him, but he didn't want to find out. With the tension easing, Shigi began to share his plan, signaling that trouble was on the horizon. Now, 3 days later, they found themselves outnumbered by heroes, with only 4 of them left to face the challenge ahead. They had to fight against All Might, Loud Cloud, Eraserhead, Midnight, and Present Mic. It all began with Shigi's plan, which, surprisingly, wasn't as terrible as it seemed. He intended to attack several hero schools that were weaker than UA, hoping that more students would flock to UA, leading to overcrowding and making it harder to manage. To execute this plan, they needed to reach a school, and Shigi thought it would be best to simply walk there. However, someone spotted them, recognized who they were, and reported their presence. Instead of just a few heroes, a surprisingly large number arrived, and it felt as though they were specifically targeting one of them. Toga was engaged with Eraserhead, Dabi faced Present Mic, and Shigi took on All Might. Meanwhile, one of them had to contend with Loud Cloud and Midnight. They suggested settling the matter peacefully, pointing out that all their quirks were related to steam and clouds. Midnight asked if they would like to surrender nicely, to which the response was a firm refusal. Midnight then remarked on their attitude, and they retorted about her hairstyle. Loud Cloud found the exchange amusing, but the situation quickly escalated. Loud Cloud flew toward them, prompting a quick reaction. A portal was opened in front of Dabi, who was creating flames aimed at Midnight and Loud Cloud. Another portal appeared in front of Eraserhead, who was using his quirk, leading directly to All Might. With a puff, All Might's quirk was erased, leaving him in a weakened state. Another portal was opened, and the flames were redirected. The next portal opened in front of Present Mic, who was currently screaming. The other end was positioned right in front of All Might, and as All Might staggered, a massive sound wave hit him, knocking him to the ground. Taking advantage of the chaos, a can of pepper spray was used against Eraserhead, who, despite wearing goggles, had gaps that allowed the spray to reach him. Using portals, a knife attack from Toga was redirected toward Present Mike, landing a hit in his shoulder. Exhaustion set in, and they found themselves breathing heavily, legs shaking. With no portals open, they leaned against a wall for support, realizing that victory might actually be within reach. The element of surprise had played a crucial role in their success. Izuku stood strong despite his struggles, determined to keep fighting. He used his quirk against the opponents, kicking and punching through portals. A cold sensation enveloped him, and with each step, he felt increasingly frozen. His heart raced, each beat making him tremble. Despite the overwhelming fatigue, he resolved to continue fighting, even if it meant pushing himself to the brink. He placed a hand on his chest, trying to focus, aware that he had depleted much of his quirk energy. It had been unwise to use it so frequently, and now he felt drained, like an empty tube of toothpaste. Before he could act, he was lifted off the ground. Hawks greeted him, commenting on how worn out he looked. In response, he remarked on his appearance, which seemed to surprise Hawks enough that he almost dropped him before catching him again. Hawks explained that he had seen many creatures like him, but they weren't as human or emotional. The conversation continued, with Hawks revealing that they were taking him to UA, not Tartarus, since he hadn't harmed anyone. Given that he was a Nomu and likely just a kid, there was no reason to take him to Tartarus. As Hawks flew with him, he remained still, letting events unfold. Hawks expressed surprise that he knew he was a Nomu, to which he responded with a yawn, indicating his fatigue. Hawks pressed for answers about his past, questioning if he remembered anything and whether he had been forced into this situation. The Nomu replied that he was simply trying to live, despite feeling like a walking corpse. Hawks realized the gravity of the situation as he felt the Nomu's strength waning. He adjusted his grip, holding him securely as he flew toward UA, hoping they would know how to help him. This Nomu was not just a lifeless being. He was a kid caught in chaos, deserving of a chance to feel safe and understood. This Nomu probably got brainwashed. In the basement of the school, Nizu had a small collection of villains. It might sound absurd, but UA was not just a school, it was also a kind of Tartarus for some. There were villains he found interesting or mistreated. He disliked seeing villains created because society had failed them. The basements of UA resembled Tartarus, albeit with better conditions. Some had excellent ideas for committing crimes. At that moment, Nizu had a new addition to his collection. When the Nomu arrived, he noticed that the creature was unconscious. Although the Nomu's heart was not beating, it began to do so now. Recovery Girl had given the Nomu some injections to help with exhaustion. To help him regain his humanity, Nizu needed to know who he was, to assist in reconstructing his memories. However, taking a DNA sample was complicated. The process of turning him into a Nomu had altered his DNA with multiple quirks. If he attempted to take a blood sample, it would contain DNA from several individuals. The same was true for Kurogiri. The quirks of the Nomu and Kurogiri were similar in some aspects. Kurogiri's quirk was a combination of Oboro's quirk and others. Most Nomus had multiple quirks, while these two had quirks combined into one. It appeared that the new Nomu possessed the same quirk, albeit in a weaker form. They had likely replicated what they did to Oboro. The mist was Oboro's quirk, while Kurogiri had a stronger version. Despite recreating everything using Oboro's DNA and quirk, this new Nomu was still not him. It was a recreation but not the same. They probably used similar quirks to bring him back. Both had the same ability but expressed it differently. Nizu observed that this Nomu utilized his quirk more effectively, though he lacked the same power. He noticed that the mist surrounding the Nomu diminished the more he used his quirk, revealing part of his arm. Perhaps overusing his quirk was the key to restoring his humanity. The issue was that he did not seem bound to any task assigned to him. With Kurogiri, they had to free him from his chains to allow him to liberate himself. In this case, there were no chains to break. They could not free him if he was already free. The question remained whether this was planned or not. This Nomu seemed to know more than he was supposed to. He did not appear to be cruel, evil, or villainous. He had the demeanor of a child, sweet and apologetic, yet still willing to fight. He did not seem to belong to either side. He was neither an enemy nor an ally. Nizu watched him through the glass window. The Nomu was restrained, but the security measures were not overly strict. The cell was likely the most challenging part to escape from. The walls were made from the same material as the HNDCFFS used against quirks. He could use his quirk in the room but not outside. He could only create a portal leading inside the room, which would not reach the outside at all. The Nomu asked where he was, and Nizu acknowledged that he had been awake for some time. The Nomu remarked that he had noticed Nizu staring and questioned the lack of privacy when someone was unconscious. Nizu found it fascinating to observe a Nomu. The Nomu then expressed his feelings about being treated like a caged animal, suggesting they should switch places. Nizu responded that, according to Mother Nature's rules, the Nomu would be the one in the grave. The Nomu countered that Mother Nature likely did not want everyone who died to end up in a grave and that he did not value rules. Nizu noted that the Nomu was much more lively than any he had encountered before. He pointed out that if the Nomu had followed the rules, he might have been a pet for a villain. The Nomu retorted that a pet is alive, while he felt like just organic material on two legs. The Nomu then inquired about Kurogiri's return to life and access to his memories. Nizu clarified that Kurogiri was a human now, not Kurogiri anymore. The Nomu expressed curiosity about how Shurikumo managed to regain his memories. Nizu confirmed that the Nomu had some access to his memories, though not complete access. The Nomu explained that he had done some research about himself and felt like he was investigating the life of a stranger. Nizu explained that to uncover his past, they needed to understand the orders he had received. The Nomu questioned whether they were talking about a manipulative voice that repeated a specific sentence in his head. Nizu asked if he followed what that voice instructed him to do. He was puzzled, wondering if this Nomu was unique in resisting that voice or if he simply did not have a strong connection to it. The Nomu admitted that the task did not make sense to him and that he was uncertain about what he was supposed to do. Meanwhile, Izuku was frustrated, feeling that Nizu believed he would simply give up and wait in his prison. He was unsure of his next move, but the atmosphere made him increasingly anxious. It felt as if he were falling asleep for brief moments, or being pushed out of his body only to return. He could hear a faint heartbeat that drove him to the edge of madness, as if his entire being trembled with each pulse. The voice in his head, which had always given him a task, grew louder and more insistent. It repeated a single command over and over: replace him. The relentless voice tormented him, and he felt himself slipping into madness. Yet, nothing could deter him, not even the locks on the door. Nizu underestimated the strength of his portals and how he could use them to cut through objects. He saw an opportunity to break the door open and shatter every lock standing in his way. As the protagonist entered the room and rushed past the cells, some prisoners looked on in shock, unable to believe that someone had actually escaped. Each cell was scrutinized closely, and those who appeared dangerous were freed with a swift cut of the lock using their quirk. For the chaos about to unfold, they needed the suppressed aggression of those confined within. Soon, guards were seen trying to navigate the turmoil. Still wearing HNDCFFS, the protagonist used their portal to slice through them, moving silently amidst the cacophony of alarms and panicked shouts. The noise was overwhelming, but it paled in comparison to the frantic pounding of their heart. Every half-minute, the heartbeat echoed in their ears, a reminder of the rising tension within. Panic-stricken voices filled the air, and footsteps approached from behind. Determined to escalate the chaos, the protagonist opened portals that unleashed jets of water, quickly flooding the area. Underwater, Tsu would surely thrive. A sudden flash of recognition struck the protagonist, but they couldn't place it. Was it a memory or something read in their diary? Heart racing, they stood still, feeling the urgency of the moment. The voices in their head grew louder, more desperate. Everything would be fine, they just needed to breathe. But then a chilling realization hit: they weren't breathing at all. Surrounded by several guards wielding weapons, the protagonist knew they had to remain calm. The guards demanded compliance, insisting they didn't want to hurt them. The protagonist scoffed at the notion, questioning why they should lower their weapons. The guards insisted that surrendering would lead to a peaceful resolution, but the protagonist argued that being confined was far worse than any threat they posed. As the countdown began, the protagonist felt a surge of defiance. They turned to see a guard charging with a taser and instinctively created a portal behind him, sending him crashing to the ground. Another portal pushed back a second guard, and before he could regain his balance, the protagonist created a portal that ensnared his head, threatening dire consequences if he attempted to escape. The tension in the air thickened as screams echoed around them. Even if they were to fall unconscious or worse, the protagonist declared that the moment they ceased using their quirk, the portal would close, sealing the guard's fate. It was a hostage situation, and no one dared to approach. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Midoriya?" The protagonist turned, startled. It was Nizu and Tsukachi. They acknowledged the situation, with Nizu expressing admiration for the escape. The protagonist remarked that it hadn't been particularly difficult, suggesting that more research on quirks would have been wise before imprisonment. Tsukachi pointed out the gravity of the hostage situation, but the protagonist brushed it off, curious about how Nizu had deduced their identity. Nizu explained that it was like piecing together a puzzle, and he had observed the protagonist closely, noting the connection with Toga. He questioned how Toga had obtained the blood if the protagonist was supposed to be dead, implying that the blood had not been fresh. The protagonist countered that Toga had an obsession, and she could have easily transferred the blood from a vial. Nizu challenged this, questioning why Toga would waste blood if she had such an obsession. The protagonist found the theory shaky, but Nizu continued, drawing connections between the protagonist, Toga, and the Nomu, suggesting that the timing of events was too coincidental to ignore. You managed to use your quirk in a completely new way. Since you were so accustomed to analyzing quirks, you easily analyzed your own and discovered a new method for its use. Nizu noted that you had asked Oboro about the boy with green hair. He pointed out that you knew Toga would transform into your former self if she drank your blood, which is why you inquired about the green-haired boy to uncover your past. He remarked that it seemed rather obvious. You admitted that you had made a few visible mistakes. Nizu continued, mentioning that you knew Oboro's name, despite him not being a famous hero. He observed that you wore red shoes, similar to what Midoriya used to wear, shoes that were specially made for quirkless individuals. He recalled how you had a habit of mumbling and that when you arrived, you had a notebook with coordinates. He compared the writing in that notebook with some of your other notebooks that had been found. You acknowledged Nizu's insights and asked if he had anything else to share. Nizu revealed that after questioning Oboro, you had broken into Inko Midoriya's house. Although nothing seemed to be stolen, the fan had been ripped out, and there was a large hole where he found a single notebook belonging to you. He speculated that there were likely other notebooks there as well and questioned why you were so interested in someone long gone, suggesting that your interest stemmed from the fact that you were that person. You responded, expressing surprise that Nizu had noticed. You then asked for his thoughts on your performance. Nizu remarked that it was surprising Toga had only transformed into one person while you had DNA from several individuals. Tsukachi then questioned whether you were truly the sweet young man he once met, who seemed incapable of harming anyone, and wondered if you had changed that much. You scoffed at the notion of change, stating that it was too grand a word. You believed people didn't change overnight. Instead, they revealed their true selves. You reflected on how, when accused of being a traitor, those around you had shown their true colors. Now, you were prepared to show them who you truly were. Nizu asked if you had your memories. You replied that you knew enough to judge and harbor resentment towards them. You recounted how, as a child, everyone wanted you to end your life, and even after you did, no one was satisfied. As a hero, they wanted you to be a villain and chose to see you as a traitor when you embraced that role. You lamented that when you weren't a student there, everyone deemed you useless and doubted your dreams of becoming a hero. Even when you succeeded, no one was satisfied. You felt like a waste of space, overshadowed by those with real potential. Nizu expressed his sorrow for what had happened, but you interrupted, questioning what the right path was. You declared that there was no right way, only decay. Nizu then stated that there was no right path for anyone and that no one could dictate what your path should be. You asserted that your right path was to kill someone. Tsukachi countered, reminding you that the Midoriya he knew wouldn't see murder as the answer. He pointed out that you had just shown that you were not perfect and that you couldn't stand on your own without breaking. He urged you not to go through with it, insisting that you would regret it. You insisted that you wouldn't regret it and threatened that if they didn't let you go, someone would lose their head. Tsukachi countered that you wouldn't kill him and that you would indeed regret it. He noted that you were a good liar, and without his quirk, he might have believed you. You felt frustrated, claiming that they had made you a liar and questioned whether it was too much to ask to live. Nizu warned against making the mistake of killing him, offering help to regain your humanity and old self. You scoffed at the idea, stating that even if you weren't a Nomu anymore, you would never be human again. You felt you could never look someone in the eye and see them as human, nor see yourself as one. Nizu questioned why you sought to regain your memories if you didn't want to be human. You explained that you couldn't live without those memories. You wanted to know who you once were and what had happened, but you wanted nothing to do with your old life. You expressed a desire for a new life, stating that you couldn't forgive everyone or everything. Nizu inquired if you wanted to rejoin the villains. You hesitated, admitting that while you weren't exactly sane, you didn't want to join a group of crazies. Nizu then made it clear that he couldn't let you walk out of. You acknowledged that you couldn't leave him alive either. Tsukachi pointed out the dilemma. You couldn't kill him, but you felt you had to, and they couldn't let you go, yet to save a life, they would have to. You found the situation absurd, noting the contradictions. Nizu explained that there was no way in or out, suggesting that you would likely kill him if they attempted to recapture you. You agreed, stating that capturing you would be the worst course of action. Nizu proposed a plan. You would distance yourself from the portal as far as you could maintain it. He reasoned that when a life was at stake, they wouldn't be able to act, and once you were uncertain about maintaining the portal, you would expand it, allowing them to capture you. You sarcastically remarked about the head start, questioning what would happen if that head start was only 10 meters. Can I still run while taking him down? Nizu stated that as soon as the act was completed, he would set the alarm system to the highest level, preventing anyone from entering or exiting. The response was that this could also happen when the person was freed. Nizu explained that with a head start, it would be possible to reach a new room, but if the alarm was triggered while they were separated, the escapee would be locked out, and they would be trapped as well. The question arose about Nizu's intentions in capturing them. The individual expressed that they had perfect memory and did not desire freedom or to become a hero. They felt they were neither a person who could be imprisoned nor an animal to be discarded. According to the law, they did not exist, and thus could not be imprisoned. Even if they were somehow classified as a living being, they were still a minor and could not be arrested. Nizu suggested that the individual might know their past but did not truly remember it. The response was dismissive, emphasizing that it made no difference. The individual felt unreachable as they had been when they were dead, and maintained that they remained in that state. Taking a few steps away from the circle of people surrounding them, the individual bent down to retrieve a taser from an unconscious person and tucked it into their pocket before casually walking out of the circle. They focused on maintaining their quirk, pushing through the weakening sensation. Observing that no one reacted, they continued down the halls. After about 300 meters, they felt the portal's stability faltering and enlarged it just enough for a guard to pass through. It was time to run. Izuku's perspective shifted as he dashed through the hallways, finding it easier to run without the need for air. Adrenaline surged through his legs, granting him the strength to keep going. He felt the essence of a hero student in every step, as if he had been running his entire life. He needed to concentrate on running, dismissing any random flashbacks. The heavy breathing reminded him of the people pursuing him, and every step was fueled by sheer willpower and adrenaline. Suddenly, the flight turned into an open space. In a flashback, he saw a green boy with freckles sprinting as if pursued by a great danger. He wasn't fleeing, he was racing toward a goal, surrounded by screams and cheers, explosions and shouts in the background. The boy appeared exhausted but pushed on, determined to give it his all. Behind him were Kaken and Todoroki, both closing in, intent on overtaking him, but he refused to let that happen. He dashed toward a tunnel where the sounds of a cheering crowd echoed behind him. The boy looked emotional, his eyes glistening with tears of joy, fulfilling a lifelong wish. No one in the crowd could match the happiness radiating from his face. But joy, he realized, could quickly turn to despair. Returning to the present, he continued running, his body on autopilot as he navigated the corridors. The path felt familiar, as if he had walked it before. He must have been here previously, otherwise, he wouldn't have found the stairs leading out of the basement. In another flashback, he recalled a conversation with Shurikumo-sensei, who thanked him for accompanying him. The green boy was beside the hero Loud Cloud, sharing a friendly moment as they descended into the basement. Shurikumo-sensei expressed that his previous companion had grown tired of him. The boy found it amusing that a hero would need company for a vaccination. Shurikumo-sensei admitted to being a little scared of vaccinations, prompting laughter from the boy. Every hero has a weakness, Shurikumo-sensei explained, needing someone to distract him during the process. The boy jokingly offered to be his cuddle buddy, realizing that Aizawa-sensei had given him free time to avoid the situation himself. They discussed the importance of the vaccination, with Shurikumo-sensei humorously noting that he didn't want to turn into a Nomu. Back in reality, he was no longer in the basement but running through the school, where few students were present due to ongoing classes. He turned a corner, trying to shake off the guards. So far, no shots had been fired, but he feared being hit. Upon rounding the corner, he entered the nearest classroom. He flung the door open, slamming it shut behind him, and pressed his back against it, breathing heavily. The metallic taste filled his mouth as his heart raced. Looking up, he found 20 pairs of eyes staring back at him, shocked. The teacher stood with his mouth half open, chalk fallen from his hand. Recognizing the students Kaken, Lida, Yura, Todoroki, and Shinso, he realized these were memories. Where Aoyama used to sit was now Shinso, and where he had been was a pile of white flowers, a picture, and neatly arranged notebooks alongside letters. I could easily recognize the handwriting, as if I had seen it hundreds of times before. All eyes were on me, and a wave of anxiety washed over me. Izuku recalled the students he once knew, their names, dreams, and struggles. But now, he felt like a stranger to them, a ghost of his former self. He was just a shadow, lost and forgotten. The first to react was Kaken, who yelled loudly, followed by a powerful explosion that shook the walls. Izuku ducked and dodged the blast, the scent of burnt wood and chaos filling the air. He realized he wasn't alone. Others were charging at him, activating their quirks. Everyone was fighting against him. He had to defend himself, even though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to. Kaken shouted in disbelief as he regrouped. Izuku couldn't face him. He was no longer the quirkless kid. In hero training, he had become something else entirely. One of his classmates approached, her zero-gravity powers activated. Izuku ducked and slammed his hand against a desk, sending it crashing toward her. The splintering would knock her off balance. Another classmate shouted, activating his speed quirk to assist her. He lunged toward Izuku with determination. Izuku stood his ground, hardly believing he was ready to fight. The classmate declared he would stop him, his voice loud and commanding. Izuku thought about how the Ida family was always so strict and obvious. He stepped forward, grabbed a chair, and threw it with all his strength. The chair slammed into the classmate, sending him to the ground. Kaken was back on his feet, ready for another attack. He yelled that Izuku was done for and unleashed another explosion. Izuku dodged to the side, only to see another classmate activating their ice power. An ice beam raced toward him, and he jumped high, landing on the tables as they shattered beneath him. The room was in chaos. Shouts, splintering furniture, and sparks filled the air. Everyone was trying to stop him. He watched as Kaken launched another explosion and grabbed a desk, throwing it to distract him while he ran along the wall. The ice user shot another beam, creating an icy barrier. Izuku grabbed another desk and tossed it over his shoulder, watching it shatter against the ice user, causing him to stagger. Aizawa-sensei was nearby, trying to regain control of the classroom. He called for everyone to step back, stepping between Izuku and the other students, but they ignored him, focused on the wild scene unfolding. Izuku saw his chance to slip away and jumped toward Bakugo. With a quick strike, he hit him, causing Bakugo to stagger back. The girl who had tried to approach earlier was distracted by the chaos, and Izuku sent a fist her way, knocking her down as he continued forward. Chairs flew everywhere as the havoc spread. He couldn't help but gaze at the destruction. Their coordination was terrible, and they fought against him like a disjointed army. He was alone. Kaken came at him with another explosion move, but Izuku ducked and jumped over the wreckage, landing right behind him. Taking advantage of the moment, he threw the next chair he could grab, crashing it into Bakugo, who fell to the ground. Bakugo yelled that this wasn't a game and charged at Izuku again. Izuku fumbled around, trying to establish a countermove. He couldn't just stand there, he had to push forward. Meanwhile, the ice user attempted to trap him in ice. Izuku jumped again, using the momentum to bounce off the side of a desk. The icy cold surged toward him as he retaliated with another throw, declaring he wasn't the only one with a quirk. He hopped around the classroom, creating chaos all around him. The classroom had turned into a battlefield, and he had become a fighter who knew no other fight. Every attack was aimed, and he kept up his assault despite everyone trying to counter him. He didn't use his quirk often, just dodging some blows. Somehow, the already foreign quirk felt even more new and unknown to him as his heartbeat quickened. He crashed into another desk, turning the classroom into complete mayhem. He could see the students attempting to retreat. Aizawa's voice called for control again, but nobody seemed to hear him. Izuku couldn't go back. No one should hold him back. Suddenly, he felt a chill as he noticed the ice beam from his classmate gathering strength. He wanted to evade it and jumped high, aiming to escape over it, but he slammed into yet another desk. The room swirled around him as he sought an escape. With every strike he felt faster, his body was primed to flee. He glanced at the door, his exit. A chance presented itself, and he bolted toward it, knowing it would lead to freedom. He threw another desk as he made his way to the door. Kaken tried to stop him, hurling an explosion in his direction. Izuku countered as he sprinted across the wreckage toward the door. Todoroki threw ice toward him. Izuku created a portal, the largest he had made in a long time. He could feel the energy leaving his body. The ice flew through the portal, freezing half of the students. One of his classmates asked who he was. Izuku simply gestured at him, a defiant move. The last chair shattered as he pushed through the door and took off running. Once again he was sprinting through the hallways. He wanted his heart to stop racing. His lungs were becoming a problem. Not only did he have a bunch of guards on his tail, but he also had a pro-hero chasing him, someone who looked like he had been running for quite a while. Izuku felt he was at death's door, not literally dead, but definitely not in the best shape to be running around. He ran his fingers through his hair and paused for a moment. He touched his head and found a fluffy tuft of green curls. His quirk was fading, and more of him was becoming visible. More skin was appearing. He lamented that his disguise was disappearing. Great, he thought, he couldn't wait to run around and scare people looking like someone who just crawled out of a grave. At least the guards had lost sight of me. I couldn't handle the idea of Jan and the others chasing me any longer. The alarm wasn't sounding, and no announcement had been made. If the alarm had gone off, it would have caused all sorts of problems, locking everyone away from me. I might have found the right moment to create a portal big enough to help me escape. An announcement over the loudspeaker wouldn't have helped either. Students would likely have left their classrooms or tried to figure out what was happening. Not everyone, but enough to create chaos, allowing me to blend in and disappear. I darted through the halls, quickly checking every room with brief glances. No, definitely not. That was the bathroom. That path only led to the lunchroom. No way the empty room could. Suddenly, I ran straight into someone Todoroki and Bakugo. Why were they here? They must have taken a shortcut. There was a parallel path to the hallways I was avoiding, or they had come through the lunchroom, which had 2 exits and was also a significant shortcut. Bakugo lunged at me before I was ready, pinning my hands behind my back. Todoroki held his right hand out in front of me, as if he was about to freeze me in place. I had a few options to escape this situation. I could admit to everything, come clean, deal with the fallout, and play myself as the victim. Or I could try to defuse the situation and stick to my lies, passing all the guilt onto them by making them feel responsible for everything that had happened. Alternatively, I could turn the tables on them, asking how they could possibly do this to me, using the little secrets I had discovered by befriending them. As tempting as that option was, it felt too manipulative, so I dismissed it. Bakugo commented on my hair, questioning why it looked like I had dried it with a fan. I thought it was an odd time for him to be making remarks. I shot back, asking why his hair looked as explosive as his attitude. He retorted that at least he wasn't a vape cloud with hair. I reminded him that my hair had seen more than he ever would, and I had more life experience in my pinky finger than he had in his whole body. I suggested he ask his father about what a hard life was like. Bakugo was furious, demanding to know what I had said. I pointed out that I was already dead and questioned why he couldn't just talk instead of being so quiet. I compared him to a dog, saying that even a dog could be more loyal than he was. He called me a nerd, and I acknowledged his observation, noting that there was a first time for everything. He released me, staring in disbelief and muttering under his breath. Before Todoroki could grab me, I turned to him, commenting on how nice it was to see him again and how much he had changed. I pointed out that he made a mistake by using his fireside, suggesting it had burned some of his brain cells. He told me not to act like I knew him, to which I replied that I didn't know him at all, but he was just like his father. I brought up the contradiction of his mother burning his fireside and questioned how he had a burn now. I suggested it was ice that had caused the mark on his face, implying it was intentional. That seemed to push him over the edge. His fire and ice powers activated simultaneously, and I seized the opportunity. Izuku's perspective shifted as he realized he had enough time to run away. He created a portal just as Aizawa's scarf flew through the air, thrown after him. Memories flooded back, but they felt distant and fragmented. Headaches began to spread through his mind, and everything would go black for a few seconds before returning to clarity. He felt every part of his body more intensely than ever before, as if he could sense the presence of all his organs. His vision shifted. One side felt familiar, while the other appeared brighter. In the middle, the two sides blurred together. He held one hand over one of his eyes, feeling the skin and his eyelashes. With the eye no longer surrounded by fog, he saw everything sharper and brighter than ever before. Breathing became difficult, as if something was constricting around his neck. His arms ached, and his entire body felt like it was on fire. Every bone seemed to be breaking, as if something had pierced through him. He knew he had to run, to escape as far as possible without stopping. Aizawa must have been busy with Todoroki, but he wouldn't leave Bakugo alone with him. They might hurt each other or themselves. Aizawa was a good teacher, pragmatic and concerned for his students' well-being. Izuku glanced around, noting two corridors, one wide, where he was more likely to encounter people, and one narrower, which would be tighter if he ran into anyone. He chose the narrow corridor, hoping it would lead him to safety. Just a few more steps, and I managed to press against the wall, leaning my back against it and slowly sliding to the floor. I gripped my hand tightly to my chest, trembling as breaths escaped my lips. A battle raged in my mind, and I couldn't articulate what was happening, why it was happening, or who was involved. I clutched my hand in my hair. Someone approached, sinking to their knees in front of me, trying to free my hand that was tangled in my hair. Had my fog dissipated enough for them to see me? My green hair was becoming visible, and I sensed that only my face remained shrouded. They urged me to breathe, encouraging me to take deep breaths and assuring me they believed in me. But the more they spoke, the more I pulled at my hair, the burning sensation still present, making me feel as though I was suffocating. Then I heard a voice urging someone named Nem to act, suggesting that their efforts were not helping and to use their quirk. Those words snapped me out of my haze. I took in my surroundings again. Nemuri. Midnight. Midnight senses. Friend. Enemy. Before she could use her quirk, I jerked my head up, instantly releasing my grip on my hair, jumping to my feet, and stepping back a few paces. I looked into two pairs of eyes, both wide and filled with horror and pain. Shurikumo-sensei recognized me and expressed concern, while Midnight-sensei pointed out that there were worse things than my current situation. I felt shaky on my legs, realizing that running was hardly an option. Instead, I pulled a taser from my pocket and shocked myself before anyone could react. I warned them that if they touched me, they would receive an electric shock. I could withstand it, but they could not. I was uncertain if Shurikumo could handle electricity, but I doubted he knew the details of his own resurrection. My breaths had been loud and desperate, and I was still struggling. I warned Midnight not to use her quirk, feeling the tension rise. Shurikumo-sensei pleaded with me, reminding me that I was still a kid. I reflected on how quickly I had been forced to grow up, questioning my own age. Midnight-sensei tried to calm Shurikumo, explaining that I was more or less alive, despite being a Nomu, and that we knew how to free me. As panic set in, I slowly began to distance myself from them. I couldn't run, my legs were too unsteady. I considered my options, but they were limited. If Shurikumo regained his composure, he would use his quirk to catch me, or Midnight would knock me out. I felt desperate, inching closer to the staircase. I didn't plan to run down, I intended to throw myself down the stairs. I had run up so many before, and the fall should be enough to end it all. Shurikumo could control the clouds, but not fast enough to catch me. He urged me to stay away from the staircase, his voice trembling with concern. In a flashback, I saw a boy waiting for a car, a gun in hand, restless and determined. He looked up at the moon, tears streaming down his face, knowing that his decision would lead to his end. There was no fear in his eyes, only resolve. He had taken the pills and was bleeding, wanting to show something to those who had betrayed him. It was clear that he sought a painful end, and I understood that feeling all too well. Midnight-sensei pleaded with me, saying that if I wanted to escape, they wouldn't stop me, but not to do it this way. She would rather see me helping the villains than end up lifeless. Shurikumo echoed her sentiments, explaining that being a Nomu was worse than death, a life forced upon me that I could never have imagined in my normal life. I asserted my free will, declaring that I was not the same Nomu they had known. I had figured out everything about myself, and given how my life had burned down around me both metaphorically and literally, I considered death the solution. Shurikumo expressed his sorrow, apologizing for not being the person I needed and stepping away from me. It wasn't going to be the same anymore, but it was going to be something if he just didn't fall. He reflected on the situation, acknowledging that it would never truly be the same, despite all that had been done for him. He felt like a burden, a person who had endured too much pain, and he believed that nobody deserved such suffering. He thought it would have been better if he had just stayed dead, remaining the happy boy in someone's memory. Now, he was not just a memory, he was a source of anguish for everyone who had ever known him. He saw no reason to continue living, whether as a Nomu or as a person. As long as he walked on 2 feet, he would only bring pain to others. Even though he didn't remember them as a person, he felt a deep pity. Shurikumo-sensei pleaded with him not to take that step. He had endured the pain of losing him, of witnessing him as a controlled Nomu, and of feeling helpless as a teacher who had been trusted completely. He had to witness the agony of seeing him alive yet suffering the same torment he had faced. He begged him to stay away from the staircase. He felt remorseful, but he believed he had no choice. As he fell, the wind whistled around him, and he heard screams that felt distant either from those who had betrayed him or from students in a panic. A part of him insisted he needed to replace someone, while another part fought to help others. This part did not panic. They were not falling in fear, nor were they dying in despair. Instead, they accepted the possibility of death, fearing only the feelings it would evoke in others. What would they think? How would they react? Was it cruel to return, to give hope, only to take it away again? It was ironic. The part of him that cared for his life was losing it, while the other part was losing it because he would cause pain to others. Just moments ago, he had been certain he would die. If someone had told him he would survive the fall, he would have laughed. But as he saw the black-purple portal beneath him, something familiar and yet researched, he would have been more surprised if he didn't survive. He fell through the portal and landed directly on Aizawa-sensei, who was rushing toward Midnight-sensei and Shurikumo-sensei. Their eyes met, and he could see the horror reflected in Aizawa-sensei's gaze. Everyone knows that moment when someone thinks they are dreaming and pinches themselves. Aizawa-sensei did just that, but instead of pinching himself, he pinched him on the nose, creating an awkward moment. He exclaimed that he was alive and urged Aizawa-sensei to stop. Turning around, he saw Shurikumo on his knees, surrounded by black and purple mist, one hand clenched on the ground. Midnight-sensei was trying to calm him, but it was futile. He was in such a deep state that he had stopped breathing, and neither Aizawa-sensei's quirk nor Midnight-sensei's efforts were helping. The situation had taken a dark turn. At first, he had been the human, and Shurikumo had been the Nomu. Now, he was the one who had risen from the dead, while Shurikumo was trapped in his Nomu form. He rushed to Shurikumo, feeling a connection that transcended mere facts. The voice in his head that had insisted he must replace someone was gone. He called out to Shurikumo, urging him to snap out of it. He shook him gently, trying to reach the person he knew was still there. He reminded him that being a Nomu was worse than death and encouraged him to fight back. Tears welled in his eyes as he pleaded for Shurikumo to stay, to not do something he would regret. He urged him to think of his friends and the hero he could still become. He sobbed and hugged him tightly, feeling the intensity of Shurikumo's struggle. The pain was palpable, and Shurikumo's grip was desperate. Shurikumo expressed his belief that he deserved the pain he was experiencing. He insisted that he had shown no mercy before, and now he felt he deserved this fate. He countered that Shurikumo had to fight against those voices, that he needed to reject the notion of mercy for them. He reminded him that he had once fought for him and urged him to do the same now. Kurogiri's voice echoed in his mind, insisting he had to protect Tamura. He retorted that Shurikumo needed to protect him instead. As he held Shurikumo, he felt the coldness of his skin and the slowing heartbeat beneath his grip. His own heart raced, but Shurikumo's was fading. The curse of quirks was holding him back. He realized that the true enemy was not the mist but the mental quirk that kept him chained. He pulled away, seeing the desperation in Shurikumo's eyes as he distanced himself. He understood that nothing from the outside could solve this problem. It was a battle that had to be fought within. He could be beaten down repeatedly, fighting with all his strength. Yet, he knew he could not win this battle. In battles, victories were elusive. Losses were inevitable. No matter how many times he fought, the opponent would always return. He could seek therapy and support, but his quirk would always resurface. To truly address the issue, one must tackle it at its roots. It was essential to uproot the problem, otherwise, it would continue to regrow. He had to eliminate it entirely or accept its permanence. He stepped back, distancing himself before turning and running away. No one would follow. He would be fine. He ran, knowing someone was in danger. As he fled, he dismantled a sharp object piece by piece until he found a suitable shard. Then he turned back. He needed to find his old class. He needed the only one who could help him in this fight. Mike-sensei was trying to gather the students back into the classroom, herding them like sheep. The students were restless, eager to understand what was happening. He called out, stating that everyone could leave, but he needed to borrow one student. Mike-sensei's expression shifted as he turned to face him, his casual demeanor fading. Mike-sensei asked who he was and what he wanted with the students. He insisted he only needed one student, assuring Mike-sensei that the others could stay. Mike-sensei refused, stating he wouldn't let anyone near his students. He pressed on, stating he needed the student now and didn't want to repeat himself. His eyes glowed green, and his hair turned black for a brief moment before returning to normal. He declared that he had come back from the dead, now as a Nomu. His presence as a human meant nothing. He called for Shinso to come forward. Shinso hesitated, confused, while Mike-sensei protested. He relished the tension of the situation, enjoying the dilemma at hand. Mike-sensei insisted he wouldn't harm any of his students, but he reassured him that he could keep the others. He had already been abandoned by Mike-sensei as a teacher, now he needed him to act as a hero. Holding the sharp piece to his throat, he warned Mike-sensei that no one would die today. If he didn't hand Shinso over, both Shurikumo and he would perish. Mike-sensei struggled with the decision, stating that he couldn't let Shinso go. But Shinso stepped forward, offering to help. He praised Shinso for his intelligence and pulled him close, feeling more dead than alive. He tasted blood in his mouth but knew dropping dead wouldn't help anyone. He instructed Shinso to hold his breath and not arrive in a state that would hinder him. Shinso asked what he needed him for, and he explained it was for his quirk. He urged Shinso to play the hero. Shinso questioned why anyone would need his help, but he cut him off, warning that if Shurikumo died because of him, he would hold Shinso responsible. They arrived at their destination, and Shinso was panting but still had enough energy to speak. He instructed Shinso to ask Shurikumo a question to keep his attention. Shinso knelt before Shurikumo, asking if he was still there. Kurogiri's voice responded, stating he must protect Tamura. The mist surrounding them was chaotic, and Shinso struggled to maintain control. He noted that he usually felt a grip on the mindset of the person he was trying to influence, but this time he felt nothing. He realized he couldn't control Kurogiri, as it was like telling someone who could fly not to fly. He urged Shinso to ask Kurogiri his name. Kurogiri responded with a deep, lifeless voice, identifying himself. He sighed, realizing they needed to be more precise. He instructed Shinso to tell Kurogiri to stop using his quirk and come back. Kurogiri sat on the floor, staring blankly, the chaos subsiding. He emphasized the need for precision in their approach. Aizawa-sensei questioned how this would work, and he explained that they needed to lock away the physical aspect of Kurogiri's quirk while addressing the mental one. They needed to determine the exact command to give him. Aizawa-sensei agreed to use his quirk once they figured out the command, but he warned he couldn't hold it for long. He murmured that they needed to state clearly what Kurogiri should not do. The quirk that had brainwashed him was stronger than anticipated, given the number of Nomus created. Shinso asked what he should tell Kurogiri. He instructed him to command Kurogiri not to protect Tamura, emphasizing the strength of the command. As Shinso shouted the command, Kurogiri began to turn violently, struggling against the influence. Aizawa-sensei used his quirk, but Kurogiri broke free, swinging a fist toward Shinso. Before the punch could land, he enveloped himself in the black-green mist and created a portal, allowing Kurogiri to punch through. Before he could withdraw his hand, the portal shrank, preventing him from pulling back. Shinso felt a wave of frustration. He believed he couldn't continue. The command might cause pain, and once someone experienced pain, he lost control over them. The other person dismissed his concerns, arguing that if that were true, Shinso's quirk would be ineffective. Injuries occurred in fights, and pain could linger longer than a fleeting moment. Even a minor scratch could disrupt control, but it was possible to maintain grip despite the pain. The challenge lay in the difficulty of holding onto someone when they were suffering. Shinso insisted that pain was what jolted people awake. His quirk placed them in a state of sleep where he could exert control. The other person countered that one could endure pain while still in a state of unconsciousness. It was challenging but not impossible. They urged him to consider the stakes. If Aizawa-sensei ceased his quirk, Kurogiri might escape, or villains could arrive. Kurogiri continued to struggle against the portal, attempting to free his hand. Shinso seized the moment to provoke a reaction, revealing that Tamura was already dead. This revelation was intended to elicit a response, hoping that the thought of impending doom would make Kurogiri more compliant. Kurogiri reacted sharply, but Shinso pressed on, urging focus on the next steps. He believed Kurogiri needed to rise, even though resistance was likely. The fight needed to continue. Once pain was introduced and struggle ensued, it was crucial to maintain the effort without faltering. Shinso warned against protecting Tamura, emphasizing the importance of their mission. Izuku struggled, fighting to free his arm. Shinso was also in distress, breathing heavily, his hands tangled in his hair. It was clear he was in pain, though he remained silent, tears streaming down his face. The anguish he felt was palpable. Izuku stood up and took a few steps toward him, grasping both of Shinso's wrists. Gradually, Shinso released his grip. His gaze was distant, his arms trembling, and his skin felt cold. Izuku brought his hands closer to his face, exhaling warm breath onto them before pulling Shinso closer, inhaling deeply. He urged Shinso to fight against the torment, to do it for the sake of another, to spare them pain. He encouraged him to repeat his command, likening it to a remote control. If one button didn't work, press it again. In the realm of brainwashing, The right words could resonate in people's minds. He advised Shinso to say his command repeatedly, loud and clear, so that not only the target understood but he did as well. Shinso's eyes refocused on Izuku, a questioning look crossing his face. Izuku explained that the quirk affected by the earth repeated its command over and over in the target's mind. It was a quiet, weak voice, but by repeating it, it could become loud for someone who had heard it countless times. He needed to be louder. Taking a deep breath, Shinso faced Kurogiri, who continued to resist the voices and the portal. He shouted commands, urging himself to stop protecting Tamura, to ignore him, to break free from the control. Both Shinso and Kurogiri writhed in pain. Shinso attempted to pull his hands back to his hair, but Izuku held on tightly. The fog surrounding them was thinning, making it difficult to see Shinso clearly. The only thing that remained distinct were his yellow eyes, which seemed to pierce through to Izuku's very soul. Izuku stared back into those eyes, recognizing the emptiness that mirrored those of others Shinso had used his quirk on. Shinso's breaths became erratic as he struggled against Izuku's grip. But Izuku refused to let go, determined to hold on until Kurogiri was nothing but a memory. He sat beside Kurogiri and pulled Shinso down with him. He felt limp, like a puppet. Izuku spoke softly, describing the monster in Shinso's head that led him through a dark labyrinth, urging him to confront the fear that had taken hold. He reassured Shinso that facing the monster within did not make him a monster himself. Shinso's breathing grew steadier, the struggle slowly fading. It was as if strength was returning to him, allowing him to reclaim control over his life and decisions. Eventually, he collapsed, and Izuku immediately checked for his pulse. The clouds and the chaos that had surrounded them began to dissipate. A pulse confirmed that Shinso was still there. But then Shinso fell too, having exhausted all his strength in the fight. The adrenaline that had fueled him faded, and he collapsed into Izuku's lap. The mist around them continued to dissolve, and a faint smile appeared on Izuku's lips as he watched them. Memories flooded back to him, granting him access to every fragment of his past. He felt the pain of his mother making herself small as he hugged her, the joy of dreaming about attending UA, the fear from his encounter with the sludge monster, and the exhilaration of winning at the sports festival. Each memory resonated deeply within him, as if he had experienced them all over again. Izuku remained by Shinso's side, not moving away. He gazed down at a beautiful piece of his memory, reflecting on how it felt as if he had died long ago, having made the decision to end everything. He thought about the foolishness of his past decisions, how he had allowed himself to be swayed by others' opinions, believing he couldn't forge a different path. Anger had consumed him. UA had been the best place for him as a quirkless individual, despite the flaws in its anti-bullying policy. There were only 3 schools willing to accept someone like him. In the surrounding area, only 3 schools accepted quirkless students. Aldera High had been a painful experience, and he doubted he could endure it again. While the death rate for quirkless students was low, it was only because many had already succumbed to the pressures before reaching high school. Takahoka High was no better, with a high risk of accidental quirk usage leading to tragic outcomes. The thought of attending either school filled him with dread. That left UA, where he had become the first quirkless student to enroll. There was no statistical evidence suggesting he should have met a tragic end by now. But he questioned whether he had truly considered other options, like fighting through adversity or pursuing online education, instead of contemplating the worst possible outcome. He realized that his life had so much potential. With effort, he could have achieved great things, yet he had not even tried. In the end, he pondered whether his thoughts of ending it all had led to anything meaningful. All it would have done was cause harm, which was never his intention. I wanted to inflict a small wound on those who had harmed me, a reminder rather than serious injuries. I shouldn't have helped a villain. I remained still, staring at Shurikumo, my thoughts drifting elsewhere. Aizawa-sensei called out to me, having been trying to get my attention for several minutes. I turned my head, acknowledging him. He mentioned that we should get Shurikumo and Shinso to Recovery Girl. I responded absent-mindedly, my lively tone from earlier now replaced with a hollow echo. Aizawa-sensei sighed, suggesting that Recovery Girl should also check on me. I dismissed the idea, insisting she shouldn't. He explained that I had been under the same quirk as Shurikumo, who had spent weeks in the hospital after breaking the spell. I remarked that it was fortunate I wasn't in his situation. Aizawa-sensei cautioned that just because I seemed fine didn't mean I was. He reminded me that Shurikumo had suffered internal bleeding when he returned, implying that I might be at risk too. I quipped about blood's natural place in the body, and Aizawa-sensei sighed again, clearly frustrated. I insisted I was serious, and he warned me that if something was wrong, I could be in danger. I reflected on my life, likening it to a long, boring movie, filled with cycles of death and life. Aizawa-sensei urged me to think of Shurikumo, reminding me of the effort I had put into protecting him. I resolved not to leave his side. Aizawa's point of view shifted to Shurikumo, who lay sleeping beside him. He felt a deep melancholy as he watched over him, concerned for his well-being. He remained in a chair between the beds of Shurikumo and Shinso, feeling numb but determined to keep an eye on Shurikumo. Lunch rush had brought him some food, which he barely touched. Despite the sadness in his eyes, Shurikumo was alive, and Aizawa vowed to do everything possible to ensure he remained that way. He regretted the mistakes he had made and the doubts he had harbored due to unfounded accusations. His obsession with analyzing his students' quirks had blinded him to their needs. He realized he should have been more proactive in preventing the situation from escalating. From that moment on, he promised to protect Shurikumo from further harm, recognizing the pain he had caused by betraying him. He hoped for a response from his mother, but after several attempts, she remained silent. While Midoriya quietly watched Shurikumo, Aizawa observed him from a distance, hoping for his recovery. He noted that Midoriya did not exhibit suicidal tendencies and could activate his quirk without reverting to a Nomu. Aizawa pondered whether Midoriya still had a connection to his humanity. He recalled Nisa's explanation that the quirk controlling Nomus operated like a voice, and both Midoriya and Shurikumo shared this trait. The difference was that Midoriya had not understood the command initially but likely did now, having been exposed to it for so long. He speculated that Midoriya might have recovered some memories, which would help him cope with the situation. From Izuku's perspective, the rush of adrenaline had dulled the voice in his mind to a distant whisper. Initially, he had been unaware of whom he was meant to replace, but now he understood that he was meant to take Kurogiri's place, who was Shurikumo. He wished for Shurikumo to remain, not to be replaced. He contemplated becoming a hero like him, questioning whether he should follow this path. After all, it seemed to be his destiny. Throughout his life, he had aspired to be a hero. After a moment of despair, he had jumped off a bridge. Returning to UA had brought him face to face with more heroes, and now he found himself back at the school after helping others confront their inner demons. He wondered if he should try again. Fatigue weighed heavily on him. He realized that the answer to his exhaustion wasn't to sleep forever. He had learned that eternity meant nothing. Nothing lasts forever, and eternity serves no purpose. So why not continue trying to be present? His paths always led him back to this school. Even his route from his old school had passed by UA. If so many paths were guiding him to this school, he felt compelled to take that route and continue his journey. The school wouldn't stand in his way forever, so he didn't need to avoid it for eternity. He wanted to be a hero, to save others from the fate he had faced, ensuring no one believed that their only path to justice was to jump off a bridge. He wanted to be a hero,